Well, we are under the Camaro and taking a look. You see the hose here is wet for the power steering, and it seems to be around that fitting part, the compression fitting for the high pressure side. And so we're leaking power steering fluid, and this is something I need to take care of. So let's try to figure out where it's coming from and replace it. Now we could go ahead and just take the easy route and replace both of the hoses and all the O-rings, because there's only two, high side and the low pressure side. But let's try to actually diagnose this. Gone ahead and wiped off the hoses here that were wet, and took off the plastic like wiring loom covering that was here, so I could see if there's any pinholes in this hose. But this hose looks to be new. This is the high pressure hose. This one looks fine. However, we're gonna keep an eye on it. Now over here where the high pressure and the low pressure are close, they were actually touching. So I bent this a little out of the way so it doesn't touch anymore, but they were touching. And so, if you know anything, when things touch and they rub together after so long of doing it, they start to eat through each other, especially when it's metal touching rubber like this here. So I am very suspicious of this low side, the low pressure line here being eaten through. And it would make sense because this is right where we're seeing the evidence of a leak. Now there's marks here on the coolant hose of a leak, and if we follow that down we can see it go all the way down here. So I thought this was coolant originally, but it's not white, and coolant residue is normally white. This is kind of orangey, and that would lead towards power steering. Like, that would make sense of some sort of hydraulic oil. So we see some fluid in the cracks here and the cracks up there, but I'm gonna be extra suspicious of the low pressure side here. So let's start it up. Let's shake the steering back and forth a couple times, then we'll put it back up in the air and see what we see. Still enough fluid in the system, the power steering fluid. It was a little low, but not low, so we're good. So we're just gonna turn the wheel, and we'll do this a couple times. So same symptom as bleeding it, but this time we're on the floor. We should feel pressure. That's going to cause pressure in the system, and then it builds up the PSIs, and then it exposes wherever the leak is. So that's why we didn't do it up in the air. Doing that a couple times didn't seem to show the issue at all. We're not really dripping, and I mean the reservoir is wet a little, it's seeping, but that is very, very normal and common, and it happens, especially on the older GM cars. Now, that's not enough to cause my issue here. I really think it's where those hoses are meeting, so it's a matter of finding out, is it the low side or the high pressure side? To give an overview of the power steering system here, we have the reservoir here that you see. Now, the fluid drains out of the reservoir or gets sucked out of the reservoir to the hose here. That goes to the power steering pump. So it pumps it in, sucks it in, and then it pumps it out. And then out we have a fitting that goes down to the power steering rack. That's the high pressure side. It does things in the rack. It leaves the rack out of the low pressure side into the return of the reservoir. Well, wasn't seeing anything, so I took it for a short drive and still don't really see much. I mean, nothing really stands out. However, up where those hoses are contacting, they're contacting again, and it does look a teeny tiny bit wet there, especially the hose on the right, the low pressure side. So, and since these hoses are so cheap, rather than just try to catch in the act, I think we're going to be proactive here and just replace the low pressure line. I'll order that up, and I'll show you how to put that in, and that should take care of our issues, but of course we'll monitor. Got the car up in the air. We're going to drain the power steering fluid. We're going to use this Mighty Vac. Well, it's the Harbor Freight version, but basically it's just a vacuum pump. We're going to suck all of the fluid out, put it back into our container because it's fresh fluid, we can reuse it. And then we'll swap out the leaking hose. So we drained all the fluid in the reservoir, but I got my drain pan here because it's inevitable. It's going to drip some. Now we're not replacing the high side, we're replacing the low side. because I'm thinking it's leaking right here where the hoses are rubbing, the high and the low pressure side. So let's go ahead and swap that out. And as you see here, all we're replacing with is a little section of hardline and then a rubber hose that we're just going to hose clamp on. So the factory has a compression fitting into it. So what we'll do is, it's going to work because this is the low side, so it doesn't need all that much pressure. So this is an 18 millimeter back here. Let's take this off and then we can see what we're working with up top. I think it's just a spring clamp. As you see, I got the old hose out, just lubricated the O-ring, put it on. Let's install this. As you can see, I got the low pressure installed, the new line. It only came with one clamp, so I threw an extra clamp on. So we have a clamp here where the rubber hose meets the metal, and then a clamp where it goes to the reservoir. So I threw that extra clamp on there just for safety. I don't know why it didn't come with two, but okay, let's fill it up. I just filled it up. Gonna bleed the system. Now you saw me bleed it when I replaced the rack, so it's the same process. Gonna do that, get back to you when all the air's out. So taking a look at this old hose, you can see where it was rubbing. So right here and here, it's like smooth, it's not ribbed anymore. There's a nice dent here, and I see a little hairline crack right there. And even though this is the low pressure side, it still sees some pressure, and I bet it was leaking from here. Explain why this whole thing is coated right around the fitting. So I don't think the fitting itself was leaking. Could have been, but I think more likely it was rubbing. It rubbed through, it was leaking through there, and then dripped onto the fitting area, and then just went to everything below it. We replaced the low pressure hose. We should be good now. I'll keep an eye on it, but we shouldn't have any more leaks. I think I'm going to go ahead and just put a new cap on. I don't really like how this one is. It's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't feel right. But that's cheap. We'll throw that on and just for extra insurance, but we should be good from here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.